Ellie was only the housemaid in the Hawthorne estate, soft around the edges, quiet, invisible, the kind of woman the men called the fat girl whenever they thought she could not hear, and she had always believed no one would ever choose her. Until one night, in front of everyone in the house, the most powerful and feared man in all of Charleston, Caleb Hawthorne, slipped an arm around her waist and said, "You are talking about my future wife." From that moment on, anyone who dared lay a hand on her never lasted long. Inside the old stone-tiled kitchen of Hawthorne Manor, the clatter of dishes rose like soft ripples of thunder, blending with the low murmur of conversations drifting down from upstairs, the kind of words that carried the weight of blood if misheard. Ellie Grace Bennett kept her head down as she washed the glasses, her hands submerged in cold, soapy water, the sharp smell of bleach clinging to her nose. A thin breeze pushed through the cracked window, but it was not enough to drown out the bursts of laughter from the dining hall where Caleb entertained his guests. She had worked here for 6 months, 6 months in which no one ever remembered her name, and that anonymity had made her feel safe, except on nights like this, when her reflection on the stainless steel oven door reminded her exactly who she was: whole, round, honest. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, her figure stood out more than she wished, her shirt clinging to her chest, strands of brown hair sticking to her damp temples, her face flushed from the oven's heat. Ellie hated mirrors. They had always reminded her that the world had long ago decided beautiful girls must be thin, and maids must remain unseen. Outside, laughter burst again. A familiar male voice rose, louder than needed, saying, "If she bends any lower, that button won't survive." Another man chimed in. "I heard she dropped a spoon this morning and had to bend down to pick it up." Kyle stood staring for 3 whole minutes. Someone whistled. Ellie steadied her breath, scrubbing the glass so hard she nearly wanted it to disappear. She did not turn, did not react. She had learned long ago that women like her had to stay silent, had to endure, and as long as they did not touch her, she could survive. Yet silence did nothing to stop those whispered words from cutting into her like tiny blades. She exhaled softly, her voice so faint only she could hear it, saying, "No one marries a fat girl. Men only hide them." If you are still holding your breath through the tense quiet hanging between Ellie and Caleb in the dark kitchen of Hawthorne Manor, make sure to subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and share it so we can keep creating emotional and mysterious stories like this every single day. And tell me where you are listening from, which city or country, so I know just how far Ellie's journey has reached out into the world. A deep male voice rose from the doorway, slicing through the heavy kitchen air, asking, "Who told you that?" Ellie froze, her hand still gripping the glass, soap dripping into the sink. She did not dare turn. That voice needed no introduction. She had heard it hundreds of times, commanding men, silencing traitors, freezing an entire house with a single glance. Caleb Hawthorne. Ellie's eyes widened, her throat tightening as she slowly turned, as though moving too fast might cause something to shatter. Leaning against the doorframe stood the man all of Charleston feared, wearing a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms with tattoos faint beneath sun-warmed skin, his loosened tie and open collar catching the kitchen light along the sharp lines of his face. She stammered, her voice trembling. I did not know anyone was here, sir." Caleb did not move. I came to get a glass of water," he said, his voice low and rough like sand dragged over flame. "But I heard something else." Ellie swallowed, glancing toward the sink. "It was nothing. I just mumble when I am tired." Caleb stepped inside, his shoes making no sound on the stone floor. She grabbed a towel to hide the trembling in her hands. "Do not lie to me, Ellie." Her name in his voice felt like a secret pulled from the dark. She turned away, whispering so softly it barely existed. "I am not lying. I just said something true." Caleb was close enough now for her to catch the scent on him. Leather, a hint of smoke, something warm and wooded. She did not dare look up. He towered over her, broad-shouldered, his very presence shrinking the kitchen. "The truth," he murmured, "is not always right." Heat crawled up her neck, her heart pounding so fast it hurt her ribs. "I should finish the dishes." "Is someone here forcing you to say those things?" he asked. "What things?" she whispered. "That no one will marry you, that you should be hidden." Ellie lowered her gaze, her voice tight. "No one has to say it. People tell me every time they turn away." For a fleeting moment, Caleb's expression softened. No longer the face of a kingpin, but a man witnessing something fragile breaking in front of him, something he could not bear. A long silence followed, broken only by a loud crash upstairs, hurried, angry voices, a door slamming shut. Caleb did not flinch, but Ellie did. "Go to bed," he said, the words quiet yet commanding. "It is late." "Yes, sir." She dried her hands quickly, avoiding his eyes. As she stepped past him, she tried to keep distance, but she was not quick enough. Caleb reached out and touched her wrist, not gripping, just touching, his thumb brushing her palm as though erasing everything she had just said. Ellie looked up, her lips parting without knowing what to ask. "Never say that again." "Say what?" "That no one will marry you," he whispered, his gaze locking onto hers. "You have no idea what kinds of men exist." Then he released her. The arguing upstairs continued, but neither of them heard it anymore. Ellie's heart hammered wildly. As she climbed the servants' stairs, unsure why he cared, certain he must simply despise weakness, because men like him had no room for fragile things. But his voice lingered in her mind, sharp and certain as a gunshot. "You have no idea what kinds of men exist." Ellie climbed the narrow servants' staircase, her palm still warm from the place where Caleb's fingers had touched her, her heart pounding so hard she could hear each throb echoing in her ears, as if her body could not process what had just happened. For 6 months in this estate she had learned silence, learned how to become a shadow, learned how to let the mockery drift past her like wind over a still lake. But Caleb Hawthorne was not the wind. He was the undertow, the ember beneath the ash, the kind of gaze that could make a person fall to their knees. And he had looked at her with an expression she did not dare interpret. When the door shut behind her, Ellie leaned against it, clutching the frayed hem of her old nightgown and drawing in a long breath. And in the dimness of her small room, everything felt too quiet. She did not turn on the light. Only the faint glow from outside slipped through the window's narrow seam, brushing pale streaks across the wall, while the first drops of rain tapped softly against the old roof. Ellie sat on her narrow bed, the single frame she curled against each night, as if leaving space for someone who would never lie beside her, and she looked down at her hands. In the muted light, her skin was still slightly flushed where Caleb's thumb had brushed her. A brief touch, light, no pressure, no hold, yet it felt as if someone had written on her skin with ink the darkness could not erase. Why had he noticed her at all? She was not beautiful. She was not slender like the women Caleb entertained at his lavish parties, women in fitted dresses, high heels, sharp eyes, lips red as wine. She was the girl who washed dishes, scrubbed floors, appeared and disappeared behind other people's backs. Yet he had stood in that kitchen, looked at her, told her the truth she believed in was not true, told her she did not know what kind of men existed. She had lived her whole life in a world where men only saw the same kind of women over and over. So who was Caleb if not one of them? A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, wind rattled the window pane, and Ellie pulled the blanket over her knees, curling into herself as if trying to become an unseen child again. Everything had happened too fast. She was used to invisibility, used to being overlooked, used to letting others walk past without ever looking back. But Caleb's eyes had not passed over her. They had stopped, seen through her, and that frightened her. Not because he was dangerous, though everyone said he was, but because if he truly saw her, then she no longer had anywhere left to hide. Downstairs, Caleb still stood in the kitchen. No one called him, yet he had not left. His hand rested on the edge of the sink, his gaze fixed on the spot where Ellie had stood. The water had cooled, the soap bubbles had collapsed, yet the sharp scent of bleach lingered. He looked at the rubber gloves she had left on the counter, the damp towel she had used to dry her hands, and for the smallest moment it felt as if something of her still hovered in the air. Caleb exhaled slowly and pushed himself away from the counter. He said nothing. He did not glance back. He walked out of the kitchen toward the staircase leading to the northern wing, a place no one entered without permission. Yet tonight that door opened not for duty but because something unnamed had stirred inside him. Caleb Hawthorne did not know why he had paused when he heard her whisper to herself, but when those words reached him he understood that he would not let anyone touch her unless they went through him first, and understood that tonight was the first time he had truly seen Ellie Grace Bennett, a truth that could not be undone. The next morning the rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, and the soft light from the tall windows fell across the marble floor of the sitting room, where the staff were cleaning the remnants of last night's gathering. Ellie carried a large tray, weaving around the sofa to collect stray cups and napkins. her cream apron hugging her rounded frame, her shoulders drawn inward as if trying to make herself smaller in the vast room and the glances that flickered her way. She knew they watched. She knew some whispered, but she was used to it. That was her role. Work quickly, stay unnoticed, avoid the eyes of Caleb Hawthorne and the men beneath him. But today Kyle refused to let things pass. He was one of the long-serving guards, comfortable with power and careless with his mouth. Leaning against the table beside the window, coffee cup in hand, Kyle stared at Ellie as she bent to retrieve a fallen wineglass beneath a chair, and his voice carried just loud enough for 4 or 5 nearby to hear. If that dress hugged her any tighter, the buttons would fly straight at my face. A few chuckles followed. Ellie remained bent over, steady, unresponsive, her breath tight in her throat. Kyle kept going. "Hey, Ellie, if you sit down, I bet that chair snaps in half. Want to try?" The laughter sharpened. Someone nudged him to stop, but Kyle ignored the warning. He stepped closer, looking her up and down with a mixture of mockery and contempt. "The kitchen must have run out of food last night. I saw you standing in there forever without going to bed." Ellie straightened, the tray clutched in her hands, her eyes meeting his without a word, her cheeks burning not from shame but from the effort of not crying. A female staff member brushed past, laying a gentle hand on Ellie's shoulder before continuing on. But even kindness could not stop Kyle. "I heard the boss went down to the kitchen last night. Hope he didn't trip over anyone." At that, Ellie turned away, moving quickly toward the kitchen, her heartbeat racing, her teeth pressed hard into her lip to keep from reacting or letting them see her tears. But she did not know that from the far end of the hallway a pair of eyes had witnessed everything. Caleb Hawthorne stood in the shadows, one hand in his pocket and the other resting on the wooden door frame. No one noticed how long he had been there. No one saw his gaze grow colder with each of Kyle's words. He did not step forward. He did not intervene. Not yet. But every word Kyle had spoken had lodged itself in Caleb's mind, etched into the mental list of a man who did not forgive. Caleb watched Ellie's figure disappear into the kitchen, the tray still in her hands, her shoulders straight but her steps trembling slightly, and inside him something slid beyond the boundary he had set for himself. And that morning no one knew that in only a few minutes the quiet inside the Hawthorne estate would shatter. The tray slipped from Ellie's hands and crashed onto the kitchen floor the moment she heard the loud impact from the great hall, the shatter of glass sounding like a sudden flash of lightning, sharp and blinding, then falling into a heavy silence. Everyone in the sitting room turned at once, the room going so still it felt as if someone had drained all the air out of the house. Kyle was pinned against the cold stone wall, Caleb's hand fisted in his collar, holding him half a step above the floor. The coffee cup Kyle had been holding lay shattered, a brown stain spreading across the white tile. Caleb's face did not twist with anger the way people expected. It did not redden or twitch with fury. It held only one expression, hard as steel. His eyes a deep, still black, that was far more terrifying than rage. And that silence alone nearly made Kyle lose control. "Boss," he stammered, trying to lift a hand to steady himself, but Caleb's grip did not shift an inch. "What's going on?" "I was only joking." Caleb did not answer. At once. He stared at Kyle as if deciding whether to break him with words or with action, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and precise. "Say it again." Kyle swallowed, eyes darting. "Say what?" "The thing you said about her. Say it. Again." Kyle's face drained of color. "I didn't mean anything by it, really. It was just a joke." Everyone laughed. "Laughed," Caleb murmured, his gaze flicking for the briefest moment toward the direction Ellie had fled, then returning, sharp as a blade. "You think it is funny to humiliate a woman who works honestly, harms no one, and is simply doing her job. You think I would let that slide." Kyle began trembling. "I didn't know you cared about her like that. I thought she was only—" The sentence died as Caleb slammed him against the wall again, the sound flat and brutal, a framed painting tilting askew beside them. "Say that again," Caleb hissed, his eyes narrowing. "Say the words only and her in the same breath." His other hand curled into a fist, the scrape of leather on fabric audible in the silence. "She is not only anything. She is someone that if you ever touch again, you will not have a mouth left to speak a second time." Kyle's lips opened but no sound emerged, and Caleb released him without warning. Kyle slid down the wall, his legs hitting the floor with a dull thud, panting, pale. Caleb straightened, smoothed his sleeve, then swept his gaze across the room. "Anyone else feel like laughing?" No one answered. Only the faint hiss of wind slipped through the barely open hall door. A few staff bowed their heads. Others pretended to busy themselves rather than meet his eyes. Caleb looked down at Kyle one last time, the man still trembling where he sat on the floor. "Next time you open your mouth, I will make sure it is the last time," and he turned away without a backward glance. When Caleb stepped through the kitchen doorway, where Ellie was crouched on the floor gathering the shards of broken glass, she froze. He stopped in front of her, saying nothing. Ellie rose slowly, her hands still clutching the dish towel. Her gaze dropped. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. She nodded. "Yes, I am fine." "No, you are not." His eyes met hers, no longer sharp, but filled with something quieter, deeper. "Go to the supply room and rest. I will have someone clean this." Ellie hesitated, but his expression was not meant for argument. She nodded and slipped through the small left-hand door. Caleb remained for a few seconds, watching the spot where she disappeared, then turned his gaze down to the floor where the glass fragments lay scattered. Every shattered piece felt like one more boundary inside him breaking apart, and he knew in that moment that Ellie was no longer part of the kitchen. She had become part of the silent storm beneath his skin. The supply room sat at the end of the rear hallway, used most days for quick breaks during busy shifts. Ellie perched on the small stool against the wall, her hands gripping the worn towel, her palms still damp with sweat. She did not know what she was supposed to feel. The humiliation from Kyle's cruelty had barely begun to settle before Caleb's explosive defense of her spun everything out of balance. She had never seen her employer lose his temper like that, and she never imagined that such anger could be because of her. She did not deserve any of it. She was just a maid, a shadow in this house, someone no one noticed unless they needed a target. The door clicked open, and Lydia poked her head inside. She was the eldest staff member, sharp-eyed but gentle-voiced. "Honey, are you all right?" Ellie nodded with a faint smile. "I am fine." Lydia raised a brow. "Tell me that again when your hand stops shaking." Ellie lowered her gaze. Lydia stepped inside, closed the door, and sat beside her. "I heard the boss gave Kyle a lesson." Ellie said nothing. Lydia let out a sigh, surprised but not truly. "I always knew there was something different in the way he looked at you." Ellie turned to her, startled. "No, he is only protecting his reputation. No one wants their staff insulted in their own home." Lydia smiled without arguing. "Then you had better brace yourself. He just told someone to prepare a room in the West Wing." Ellie frowned. "The West Wing?" "The guest quarters," Lydia said softly. "I heard it is the room next to the hallway where Caleb stays." Ellie shot upright. No, that is impossible. I cannot stay there. I am a maid." "Not tonight," Lydia said, her voice firm. "Tonight you are the woman everyone in this house knows the boss personally defended. You think anyone will let you go back to your old room where every whisper will follow you down the hall?" Ellie shook her head, her voice low. "I do not want trouble. I do not want to become the center of anything." Lydia stood, resting a hand on her shoulder. "The problem is, you do not get to choose anymore. He already has." Before leaving, she paused at the doorway, her voice dropping to a quiet reminder. "I do not know what is happening, Ellie, but men like Caleb Hawthorne do not explode for someone, unless that someone has made them lose control just a little." When she was gone, Ellie sat motionless, her thoughts spinning. Less than an hour earlier, she had been the butt of a cruel joke. Now she was being moved to the West Wing, a place of thick carpets, silk pillows, and heavy wooden doors, meant only for those whose names were carved into the guest list. An hour later, she entered the room prepared for her. High ceilings, wide windows, a bed dressed in white linen and thick blankets scented faintly of sandalwood, everything quiet enough to feel unreal. She circled the room, brushing the bed's edge, her fingers sliding along the carved chair. A maid did not belong here. But then she saw something on the bedside table. A glass of water and a small white pill. A sedative, placed neatly, no note, but clear enough to reveal who left it. She stepped closer, and picked up the glass, her palm turning cold. She knew Caleb had left it, and that frightened her more than his anger earlier, because Caleb did not say he cared. He acted, and Ellie was not sure she had the strength to resist that kind of care if it kept coming. Night fell over the Hawthorne estate like a thick velvet curtain swallowing every sound, and in the new room Ellie lay still on the wide bed, her eyes wide open in the darkness. She was not used to this kind of quiet, not used to heavy drapes that blocked the light, to the scent of old wood and fine linen, to a space where every movement she made echoed like a confession. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each beat a long, tired sigh. She sat up, pushed the blanket aside, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor as she walked toward the window. She lifted the curtain slightly, revealing the dim garden below, where faint yellow lights dotted the paths and the shadows of guards moved along the stone walkways. Then, a knock sounded at the door, soft but certain. Ellie turned, her heartbeat quickening. No one entered the west wing unless allowed. She opened the door, her palm cold against the handle. Caleb stood there without a coat, only a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled high, and an expression that made the air around him feel dense. She had no time to react before he spoke, his voice low. "I hope I am not disturbing you." She shook her head and stepped aside. He entered slowly, every step measured. "I am not used to having someone else sleep in this wing, but tonight it felt necessary." Ellie could not find words. Her throat felt dry. Caleb stopped near the table, his gaze flicking to the half-finished glass of water. He nodded as if satisfied she had used it. "This place is not always as safe as it looks," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I cannot let someone like Kyle believe he has the right to speak about you that way and pay no price." Ellie lowered her head, her voice barely more than breath. "I did not think you would care. I thought I was only a shadow in this house." Caleb was silent for a few moments, then stepped closer. "I care." Ellie looked up, her gaze meeting his at a distance far too close. "Since when?" she whispered. "Longer than you think," he replied gently. "I see you every morning standing by the kitchen window with sunlight on your hair. I hear you humming softly while you wash the dishes. I know you put an extra spoon of coffee in my cup every morning even though I never asked." Ellie pressed her lips together, her heartbeat stumbling. "I was not trying to do anything." "I know," he murmured, stepping closer still. "It is because you never try that I cannot help caring." She backed up slightly until her spine brushed the edge of the table. "I am not like the other women who have been here." Caleb nodded once. "I know that. I am not beautiful. I am not slender. I am not remarkable in any way." "Wrong," he said immediately, without hesitation. "You are more remarkable than any of them, because you never try to be anyone but yourself." Ellie turned away, her eyes brimming. "You do not have to say those things." "I do not say what I do not mean," he answered, stepping behind her, his voice low enough to be a confession. "I just want you to know that I notice the things you think no one sees." Ellie gripped the table's edge, her eyes closing. The air between them thickened, taut as a thread waiting for the slightest touch to break it. Caleb stood only a few steps behind her, not touching her, but his presence wrapped around her like warmth that crossed the room. "Go to sleep, Ellie," he murmured, his voice soft as a lullaby. "Here, you are safe." Then he turned toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, not looking back, but his voice cut cleanly through the silence like a gentle blade. "And do not ever call yourself a shadow again. Not under my roof." The door closed behind him, leaving her standing in the dark with her heart racing and the clear knowledge that everything had shifted forever. Ellie did not sleep. She had curled up on the mattress of the bed that was far too large, feeling like a speck of dust in a palace. When the first light of morning slipped through the gap in the heavy velvet curtains, she sat bolt upright, her heart hammering. Habit. She had to get to work. She scrambled from the bed, looking down at the soft silk nightgown that had been left for her. It felt foreign against her skin. She quickly changed back into her own wrinkled maid's uniform, the one she had hastily washed in the sink and dried near the small fireplace. The rough, familiar fabric immediately pulled her back to reality. Who was she? She wasn't a guest. She was a maid who had caused trouble. She slipped out of the room, tiptoeing on the thick carpet, holding her breath. But as she reached the servants' staircase, a voice stopped her. "Miss Bennet." Ellie flinched and turned. It was Lydia, standing in the main hallway, her hands clasped. Her expression no longer held the warmth of yesterday, but the neutral, almost cold mask of a manager. "Mrs. Lydia. I was just going to work." "No," Lydia said flatly. "You will not be working. The boss gave orders." "Orders?" Ellie recoiled, panic rising in her chest. Is he firing me?" Lydia sighed, her professional stiffness cracking for just a second. "Good Lord, you foolish girl. He isn't firing you. He said you are a guest. You will be dining with him tonight. Dining? The word sounded foreign. I can't. I don't. You will be in the east dining room at 8 o'clock, Lydia interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. I will have a suitable dress sent to your room. And Ellie, she paused, stepping closer. Do not try to go down to the kitchen. You don't belong there anymore. Not right now. Lydia didn't finish the thought. She just shook her head and walked away, leaving Ellie standing alone in the vast hallway, feeling even more displaced than when Kyle had been mocking her. At 8 o'clock, Ellie stood before the east dining room. This room was smaller than the great hall, but the fireplace was roaring, and only a single table was set, for two. Candlelight made everything glitter. Caleb was already there, his back to her, looking out the window. He wasn't in a suit, just a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, just as he'd been the night he found her in the kitchen. He turned as she entered, and his gaze swept over her. The dress Lydia had sent was a deep, simple blue velvet. It was modest but elegant, and it fit her curves surprisingly well. Ellie, he said, his voice low and quiet. He pulled out her chair. Her heart was beating so hard she was afraid he could hear it. She sat, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. The silence was heavy. Food was brought out, a cream soup. Ellie stared at the 3 different spoons laid out beside her plate. She had absolutely no idea which one to use. Last week, she had been the one polishing them. She glanced at Caleb. He was watching her, not with mockery, but with an intense, unreadable curiosity. Her hand trembled. She squeezed her eyes shut and picked up a spoon, the smallest one, probably meant for dessert. She knew it was wrong the instant she touched it. Heat flooded her face, and the sting of humiliation burned behind her eyes. She was going to embarrass him, and herself. She tensed, waiting for a correction, a sigh, or worse, a judgmental silence. But Caleb said nothing. Instead, he calmly reached over, picked up the exact same small dessert spoon from his own place setting, and began to eat his soup. That gesture, that quiet acceptance, the fact that he was willing to be wrong with her so she wouldn't be alone, hit her harder in the chest than any of his anger had. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. He just raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something soft in his expression. Is something wrong? I used the wrong spoon, she whispered. Did you? He glanced at his own spoon, then back at her. Seems to be working just fine. A small, almost invisible smile touched his lips, and just like that, the tension snapped. She carefully lifted her own spoon to her mouth. You don't have to be afraid, Caleb said, his voice softer as he set his spoon down. Not here. Not with me. I don't know what to do, Ellie confessed, her voice breaking. I don't know who I'm supposed to be. A day ago, I was scrubbing this floor. I know who you are, Caleb said, his voice firm. He leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in his dark eyes. You're Ellie. You are not a maid. You are not a guest. You are mine. The words should have terrified her. They were possessive, absolute, but instead, they wrapped around her like a warm blanket. I won't let anyone hurt you again, he added, his voice dropping lower, including yourself. Eat, Ellie. You need your strength. That night, for the first time in LAD, the West Wing, Ellie slept. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, and when she woke the next morning she felt something far more dangerous than fear. Hope. That hope lasted until exactly 10 o'clock. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thick curtains. Ellie woke from the first deep sleep she'd had in months. The dangerous feeling of hope from the previous night's dinner still settled warmly in her chest. His words, "You are mine," replayed in her thoughts, making her feel, for the first time, like she truly belonged somewhere. She dressed, tied her hair, and left the room early, not to avoid being seen, but because she was eager to see. Well, she wasn't sure what she was eager for, but the air felt different today, as if something restless had stirred. But the air felt different today, as if something restless had stirred. In the main hallway, 3 maids huddled near a door, phones in hand, eyes wide with excitement they could not hide even behind their covered mouths. When Ellie passed, one of them paused, stared at her, then returned to whispering over the screen. Ellie slowed, unease curling in her chest. She slipped into the laundry room where Lydia sorted tablecloths. The older woman looked up. "You have not had breakfast." Ellie shook her head. "Lydia, what is going on?" "People are whispering." Lydia hesitated before pulling her phone from her apron and handing it over. Better you hear it from me than from anyone else. The screen displayed an online headline in bold red. Tycoon Caleb Hawthorne reunites with former fiancée Vanessa Pierce, New York's political princess. Beneath it was a photo of Caleb at a formal event, holding hands with a tall, slender blonde woman in a turquoise gown. She was smiling. Caleb was not, but his gaze into the camera dared anyone to question him. Ellie's knees felt hollow. She gripped the counter, her lips parting without sound. Lydia gently reclaimed her phone. The article went up around midnight. Might be a publicity stunt. Even I find it hard to believe. Caleb is not the kind to play reunion games. Ellie said nothing. Inside her mind, everything slowed. The words he had spoken the night before, collapsing like brittle foam crushed under pressure. I see you. I do not ignore what you think no one notices. If that was true, then why? Why was he holding another woman's hand while telling her she was seen? Ellie left the laundry room quietly, each step slow as if moving through water. The whispers eased as she passed, but the eyes did not. She avoided them, returned to the West Wing, closed the door, and sat heavily on the bed. The image of Vanessa Pierce refused to fade. She had heard the name in passing but never cared. Now it felt like a blade sliding between her ribs, not because she was jealous, but because she felt foolish. Foolish for thinking she could be seen. Foolish for believing she might step out of the dark. She pressed a hand to her forehead, breathing unevenly. Caleb had promised nothing. He had not spoken of love, but the way he looked at her, the way he stood behind her without touching, the way his voice softened around her, those things had been enough to make her believe, even briefly, that she was not invisible. And now everything had collapsed as quickly as it had appeared. Ellie rose, opened a drawer, took out a sheet of paper and a pen. Her hand trembled as she wrote, but the words formed clearly. She did not want to wait for Caleb to explain. She had spent her life retreating before she could be hurt, and this time would be no different. By the time night settled again over the Hawthorne estate, the hall lights were dimmed, only a few lamps glowing softly at the corners, and outside the wind moved through the old trees with a restless whisper. In her room, Ellie sat motionless at the writing desk, a blank page before her daring her to speak what her heart had no name for. Candlelight flickered along the edge, reflecting her face in the cloudy mirror, her eyes deep with disappointment and hurt. She had spent hours like this, writing a few lines only to tear them away. Nothing felt right, clear, or safe enough to leave behind. Finally, she lifted the pen again, her hand unsteady but determined. Caleb, I know you owe me no explanation. I know we never named whatever happened between us, but I cannot stay here, not after seeing that picture. I do not blame you. I only blame myself for thinking I was special enough to be seen. I have lived in the shadows all my life, and I thought for the first time someone saw me, but I was wrong. I do not belong in your world, Caleb. I was never meant for your world. You needed someone who could walk beside you through a crowd without bowing her head or shrinking into fear, while I have only ever known how to look down and move quietly. So do not look for me, and if anyone asks, simply say I left the way I arrived, without a sound. Ellie. She set the pen down, folded the letter with careful precision, and placed it in the center of the pillow, leaving behind no photos and no possessions, because she wanted to disappear as lightly as a breath, as if she had never existed in that room at all. She opened the wardrobe, slipped on her worn coat, tied her hair back, and stepped into her soft-soled shoes, the kind that made no sound when she walked. She opened the door, paused on the threshold for a single steady breath, then stepped into the dim hallway that stretched long and cold before her. Each footfall echoed inside her chest like a silent farewell. She moved through the West Wing, following the corridor that led to the back exit, where the delivery trucks usually passed. No guard stood watch there at this hour. They were stationed near the front gates and Caleb's office, and she knew he was still awake, likely reading in that study filled with leather and cigar smoke. She imagined his eyes skimming over a newspaper with his name and Vanessa Pierce printed in bold across the front page, imagined him glancing toward the window before returning to his work as if nothing had changed, because perhaps for him none of this meant anything. She stopped before the heavy wooden door, her hand resting on the latch, and looked back at the great house one last time, not out of regret but to remember, because for a brief slice of her life she had lived here and had heard someone say she was seen, and even if that was no longer true, it had been a warmth she carried through her coldest nights. She stepped outside, the wind slicing through her coat and chilling her down to the bone, and she did not look back, because Ellie Grace Bennett was the kind of woman who, once she walked away, left no footprints behind. Caleb stood in the study, a glass of whiskey untouched on his desk. The house was too quiet. He hadn't been able to focus for the last hour, an insistent, clawing itch under his skin telling him something was wrong. He'd told her she was safe. He'd promised her. But the memory of her face, that fragile, devastating hope he'd seen at dinner, made his stomach tighten. He'd created that hope. He was responsible for it. He pushed back his chair and walked, his steps silent and driven, toward the West Wing. He didn't knock. He used his own key. Ellie? The room was empty. The air was cold, the scent of sandalwood faint. He saw the window, cracked open just slightly, the curtain fluttering, and then he saw it, not on the pillow where she'd left it, but on the floor by the door, as if she had dropped it in her haste to flee. The white envelope. His blood ran cold before he even touched it. He picked it up, his name scrawled in her hesitant, careful script. He read the words, "I do not belong. I was wrong to think I was special. I do not blame you. Do not look for me." The paper crumpled in his fist. Not in anger, in a sudden suffocating vacuum of pure, unadulterated fear. No, the word was a guttural growl. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an answer. Why? What had happened between dinner and now? And then he saw it, on the mahogany desk in the corner, where a maid must have left it that morning, the Charleston Post. The headline screamed, "Tycoon Caleb Hawthorne reunites with former fiancée Vanessa Pierce." "You fool," he hissed, the words directed at his own reflection in the dark window. He had planted that story himself. It was a feint, a calculated move to misdirect his enemies, to make them focus on Vanessa, a woman made of steel who could handle the attention while he kept Ellie, the only thing that mattered, safe in the shadows. He had never imagined she would see it. He had never imagined it would be the very thing that drove her away. He didn't run. He moved with a speed that was far more terrifying. He hit the intercom on his study wall, his voice a blade of ice. "Lock down the estate. No one in or out. Get me eyes on all perimeter gates. Now." His head of security, Marcus, was on the different line in 3 seconds. "Sir? Ellie. She's gone. How long?" A pause. The sound of rapid, frantic typing. "Sir." She passed the South Service Gate. "On foot. 23 minutes ago. 23 minutes. Alone. In the dark. The city would swallow her." His stomach clenched so hard he thought he might be sick. He was already moving, strapping the custom-molded leather holster to his side, checking the clip on his pistol. "Marcus." His voice was lethal. "Did you see the article this morning? The Vanessa Pierce." "Yes, sir. A good move. The rivals are." "It wasn't a move." Caleb cut him off. "It was a mistake." Rains. A dead silence on the other end of the line. Marcus understood immediately. Malcolm Raines, the man who had been silent for 3 years, the man who fed on weakness, who had been waiting for Caleb to show a single crack in his armor. "Sir, you don't think. I let the world think Vanessa was my future. He would never be stupid enough to touch her. But he has eyes in my house. He knows I moved a maid into the West Wing. He knows I humiliated Kyle for her. He knew exactly who my real weakness was." He slammed the door of his study, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent manor. "She's not just running away, Marcus. She's walking into a trap, and I'm the one who baited it." He was down the stairs, ignoring the staff who flattened themselves against the walls as he passed. "Get the team, all of them, the old warehouse district on the water, and get me a location on Raines. I don't care who you have to bleed to get it. You have 10 minutes. He burst through the front doors, the cold night air hitting his face, but he felt nothing, only the icy, primal terror of a man who had just realized he had personally handed the only thing he cared about to his mortal enemy. The night wind whipped across the gravel path leading away from the Hawthorne estate, the trees swaying like shadowed arms whispering warnings, and Ellie pulled her collar tight as she slipped through the side gate, the heavy wooden door thudding shut behind her without anyone noticing. No one followed, no one saw. She left exactly as she wished, without a trace, her only companion, the quiet ache, trailing her steps. The road blurred ahead through a thin veil of mist as she headed toward the parking lot, planning to reach the public phone near town and call a taxi, the only plan she had and the only courage she could muster. She did not know a black car sat quietly a few yards away, headlights off, windows darkened. When she turned past the corner of the stone wall, everything happened too fast to fight. A hand clamped over her mouth, Another wrapped around her waist and lifted her clean off the ground. She tried to scream, but it broke into a muffled choke. She was dragged toward the black car, the back door yanked open, and before she could see who waited inside, her head slammed against the metal edge. Pain exploded white-hot, then vanished into pitch black. When Ellie woke, she lay on the floor of a room she did not recognize, the ceiling low, the concrete walls rough, the weak yellow light buzzing overhead, the air thick with mold and stale cigarette smoke that made her stomach twist. Her wrists were tied behind her with coarse rope, her ankles bound, her mouth sealed with tape, her head throbbing from the blow. A pair of black leather shoes stepped into view, each footfall slow and deliberate. The man crouched down, so she had no choice but to see his face. Malcolm Rains. The name alone could make an entire city flinch. He had once been Caleb Hawthorne's bitterest rival in the eastern underworld before vanishing after a bloody operation 3 years earlier, presumed dead and buried deep. But here he was, smiling down at her. "Hello, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and coated with something vile. "To be honest, I did not know Caleb cared about you this much, but up close you have your charms." Ellie glared at him, breathing hard behind the tape. Malcolm smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I do not want to hurt you unless Caleb needs the reminder." He rose and crossed to a wooden table where a phone and a gun lay waiting. "You know what I hate most about him," he said, looking back at her with a simmering contempt. Not his power, but his belief that he can keep everything without ever paying the price. Ellie struggled, but the ropes bit deep. Malcolm watched her fear bloom, savoring it. "And now you are the first invoice he is going to settle." His laughter scraped across the walls just as the metal door rattled with a dry, sharp sound, as if old hinges had been forced. Malcolm froze mid-laugh. A faint breeze slipped through the crack, carrying the unmistakable scent of gunpowder. He stiffened, eyes narrowing, his hand leaving the cigarette and reaching for the gun on the table. He never made it. The first shot sliced through the air like a blade through silk. Malcolm staggered, the bullet tearing through his shoulder and throwing him across the floor. The door burst open. Caleb Hawthorne stepped inside, his black shirt dusted with debris, his gun raised, his finger steady on the trigger. His eyes swept the room and locked on Ellie, bound on the floor, terror pooling in her eyes. Malcolm groaned, reaching desperately for the weapon on the table, but the second shot thundered before he could touch it. The bullet struck straight through his heart. No scream, no final words. Malcolm died in a single broken breath, his eyes frozen wide with hatred. Caleb did not spare him a glance. He crossed the room, dropped to one knee beside Ellie, gun still in his left hand while his right tore the tape from her mouth and cut the ropes from her wrists and ankles. Ellie gasped, her breath breaking into sobs as tears spilled uncontrollably. Her hands clutched his shirt, shaking violently. Caleb tossed the gun onto the table and pulled her against him, arms wrapping so tightly. Around her she could feel the frantic rhythm of his heartbeat hammering against her cheek. "I am here," he whispered, his voice raw and low as if he himself had just crawled out of some abyss. "I am here, Ellie." She collapsed against him, trembling, breathing in the warmth she had believed she would never feel again. Outside came the screech of tires and the thunder of boots as Caleb's men stormed in, weapons drawn, their faces hard but their eyes widening in shock at the sight of Malcolm Rains dead on the floor, and their boss holding the woman everyone had long sensed was someone no one else was allowed to touch. Caleb lifted his gaze to them, the warmth in his eyes extinguished, replaced by something sharp and unyielding. "Clean this up. Leave no trace." One of the men nodded immediately, pulling out his phone to signal the cleanup team. Caleb turned back to Ellie and touched her cheek gently. "He will never be able to hurt you again." Ellie still could not form words. She looked at him, smelling the faint gunpowder clinging to the cuff of his sleeve, her vision blurring, unsure whether from tears or from the tight ache rising in her throat. Caleb pulled her into his arms again, softer this time, his hand sliding behind her head as if shielding her from the whole world. "I am sorry," he murmured, each word shaped like regret carved deep. "I let you walk away. I did not hold on when I should have. But from now on, no matter how far you try to run, I will find you." Ellie gave the smallest nod as tears slipped down onto his collar. For the first time since the night she left, she felt protected, seen, held by something no words were strong enough to describe. And for the first time in her life, surrounded by blood and gun smoke and the cold night wind, Ellie understood one truth with absolute clarity. She did not have to hide anymore. The convoy of black cars bypassed the main entrance of the estate. They drove directly onto the manicured lawn, stopping only feet from the private terrace of Caleb's personal wing. His men, silent and disciplined, had already formed a perimeter, blocking the view from any prying eyes on the staff. Caleb carried Ellie out of the car. She was frighteningly light in his arms, her body rigid with a shock so deep it had stolen her voice. The rain from the warehouse firefight had soaked her thin clothes, and she was trembling violently, her skin like ice. He didn't take her to the West Wing. He didn't take her to a guest room. He kicked open the French doors to his own bedroom and carried her straight through, past the massive unmade bed, into the adjoining bathroom, a cavernous space of black marble and steel. He set her down gently on the plush mat by the enormous walk-in shower. "Ellie, look at me." She stared blankly at the wall, her eyes wide and unfocused, still seeing the warehouse, the gun, the blood. "Ellie." He gripped her chin, his voice sharper, forcing her gaze to meet his. "You're safe. It's over. You are. Here, with me." Her breath hitched, a dry, ragged sob, and the dam of her shock finally broke. She collapsed forward, burying her face in his shirt, her body shaking with convulsive, silent tears. Caleb's arms wrapped around her, crushing her to his chest. He held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, simply breathing in the scent of her hair and the metallic tang of her fear. "I'm here," he whispered, the words raw. "I've got you. I'm so sorry, Ellie. God, I am so sorry." He let her cry for a full minute, his own guilt a living thing, clawing at his throat. He was the one who had done this to her, his mistake, his enemy, her pain. Finally, he eased her back. "You're freezing. You have to get out of these wet clothes." He stood and turned on the shower, steam immediately filling the room. He didn't ask her. He acted. He was rough but efficient, unbuttoning his own damp, blood-spattered shirt and tossing it aside. He turned back to her. Ellie just sat there, shaking. "I won't hurt you," he said softly. He knelt, his fingers going to the buttons of her ruined coat, but his hands, which had held a gun steady not an hour before, were now shaking. Ellie saw it. She saw the tremor in his fingers. She saw the raw guilt in his eyes, a vulnerability she had never imagined could exist in a man like Caleb Hawthorne. She slowly lifted her own trembling hands and placed them over his, stopping him. I can do it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Caleb froze. He looked at her small, pale hands covering his. He closed his eyes, a muscle in his jaw clenching. "This is my fault," he breathed, the confession torn from him. "The Vanessa article. It was me." Ellie frowned, her mind still foggy. You knew?" "No." He pulled his hands back, sitting on the cold marble floor, looking utterly defeated. I arranged it. The story. It was a lie. A strategy." He looked at her, his eyes burning with self-loathing. "I needed a target, a distraction, to keep men like Rains looking in the wrong direction. Vanessa was in on it. It was a political arrangement for her family. I thought if they were all watching her, no one would see. No one would see you." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "I thought I was protecting you by hiding you, but all I did was make you the one thing a man like Rains looks for. A secret. A weakness. I drove you out into the dark, Ellie. I'm the one who put the target on your back." Ellie stared at him. All her fear, all her feelings of betrayal over the article, evaporated, replaced by a stunning, painful clarity. He wasn't a monster who had discarded her. He was a fool who had tried to protect her in the only way he knew how, with shadows and strategy. She reached out, her fingers barely grazing his stubbled jaw. "But you came for me." "I will always come for you," he growled, capturing her hand and pressing a hard kiss into her palm, right over the raw, red rope burns on her wrist. He gently turned, her hand over, his thumb tracing the marks. His face hardened. "This," he said, his voice flat and deadly, "will never happen again. Do you understand me?" She nodded, tears welling again. "They'll be asking questions," he said, his mind already shifting, calculating. "The press, my rivals. After tonight, they know you're not just a maid. I can't hide you anymore. It won't work. It will only put you in more danger." He stood, pulling her to her feet. He wrapped her in a thick, heavy towel. "Caleb, what are we going to do?" she whispered. He looked down at her, his eyes dark and resolute. I'm done hiding you, Ellie. I'm done with strategies. He tilted her chin up. He didn't just target a maid. He targeted the woman I love. And I'm going to make sure the entire world knows it. Tomorrow, there will be no more speculation, no more whispers, only the truth. What truth? That you are mine, he said, his voice dropping. That I am going to marry you. That you are not my weakness. You are my goddamn fortress. Now, get in the shower. You're safe. By morning, the gates of the Hawthorne estate were clogged with media vans, cameras, and reporters pressed so tightly against the iron fence, it felt as if they were waiting for a coup to unfold. News of Malcolm Raines's execution had spread like fire meeting wind, yet what sent the press into a frenzy was not the death of a criminal, but the moment Caleb held Ellie in the storm the night before and declared her his future wife. No one knew how or when their story began, but everyone agreed that whatever they had seen in Caleb's eyes was not a publicity stunt. When the grand doors of the estate opened, Caleb stepped out first, dressed in a sharp black suit and a charcoal tie, carrying himself like a commander returning from victory, while Ellie followed half a step behind, wearing a soft cream dress that skimmed her figure, her hair pulled back though a few loose strands framed her face, softening the tension in her eyes. Caleb reached for her hand in front of 100 flashing lights, and the reporters erupted at once, microphones thrust forward like spears. Mr. Hawthorne, can you confirm if the woman last night is your fiancé? Mr. Caleb, was the reunion with Vanessa Pierce merely a publicity strategy? Who is she? A maid. How did she step into your world? Caleb tightened his hold on Ellie's hand and moved forward, his voice carrying clearly without the need for a microphone, silencing the crowd with nothing more than certainty. Her name is Ellie Grace Bennett. And yes, she was once a quiet part of this house. He glanced at Ellie, then back at the sea of cameras. But do not let the word maid make you think she is lesser or fragile. She is the only person here who has never asked me for anything, never exploited my position for her own gain, and never made me doubt that the emotion in her eyes was real. A reporter pressed in. Are you sure emotion has not clouded your judgment? Caleb gave a faint, amused smile. I run 12 companies, prevented 3 internal coups in 2 years, and last night I buried one of my greatest enemies. I do not believe I am the type to be blinded by emotion. I chose Ellie not because I am weak, but because I am strong enough to love someone who does not belong to the spotlight. The heavy oak doors of the conference hall shut, cutting off the blinding flash of cameras and the roar of 100 voices. The silence that fell in the hallway was so sudden, so absolute, that Ellie felt her knees buckle. Caleb's arm was instantly around her waist, steadying her, pulling her against his side. He didn't say anything, just guided her down the private corridor toward his study. I need to make a call, he said, his voice low, the command tone returning now that the press was gone. My study. Wait for me there. He opened a door and led her into a room she had never seen. It smelled of old books, leather, and his faint, smoky scent. He sat her down in a deep leather armchair by a cold fireplace. No one, he said, will bother you. I will be back in 10 minutes. He turned and left, closing the door behind him, leaving her alone in the quiet heart of his power. Ellie stared at her hands, a violent tremor starting in her fingers. It was over. The world knew. She was no longer a shadow. She was fiancé. The word felt impossible. A costume she was wearing that didn't fit. She looked down at her simple dress, feeling small and overwhelmed. The door opened so softly she didn't hear it at first. Lydia stood in the doorway, but this was not the Lydia who managed the staff. She wasn't holding a clipboard. She was holding a small silver tray with a single cup of tea. Ellie started to stand up, the habit of a maid ingrained in her. Lydia, Sit, child, Lydia said, her voice quiet but firm. She entered the room, and for the first time, Ellie noticed Lydia wouldn't quite meet her eyes. She seemed nervous. Lydia placed the tea on the small table beside Ellie. I thought, you might need this. Your hands are shaking. Thank you, Ellie whispered. You don't have to. You shouldn't be serving me. Lydia finally looked up, her gaze complex, a mixture of awe and something like sadness. Things have changed, Ellie. You must know that. I'm not serving you. I am assisting the future Mrs. Hawthorne. The name hit Ellie like a physical blow. She shook her head. Please don't. I'm just me." "No," Lydia said, her voice softening. "You're not. Not anymore." She clasped her hands in front of her. "I have worked in this house for 20 years. I saw Mr. Hawthorne grow up. I saw him build his empire. I have never, not once, seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you in that conference room." She leaned in, almost conspiratorially. "The staff is terrified, you know." Ellie's head snapped up. "Terrified? Of me? Why? I would never." "Oh, child, no," Lydia chuckled, a dry sound. "They are not terrified of you. They are terrified of him. They are terrified of what he would do to anyone who even looks at you the wrong way. Kyle was just the beginning. Today, he didn't just protect you. He chained himself to you in front of the world. He has made you his. In this house, that makes you more powerful than any of us." As if on cue, the study door creaked open slightly. A young maid, Sarah, a girl Ellie had shared breakfast with just days ago, poked her head in, holding a feather duster. She froze when she saw Ellie sitting in the master's chair. Sarah's face went completely pale. She didn't speak. She didn't nod. She dropped into a low, clumsy curtsy, her eyes fixed on the floor, and immediately pulled the door shut, vanishing. Ellie just stared at the closed door, her heart sinking. Lydia sighed softly. "You see? You can't go back, Ellie. That life is gone. You are one of them now." Lydia turned to leave. "Try to. Drink the tea. You'll need your strength. This is only the beginning." Lydia left, closing the door with a quiet click. Ellie was alone again. She looked at the fine china cup. She lifted it, and this time, her hand was perfectly steady. His words silenced the crowd for a suspended heartbeat. Then Caleb turned to Ellie, his voice softening into something meant only for her. "And I want the world to know, this is not rumor, not strategy. It is real." He squeezed her hand and looked directly into the nearest camera. "I am officially announcing that Ellie Grace Bennett is my fiancée, and we are getting married." The final sentence was delivered with such certainty there was no space left for questions. Flash after flash exploded, but Ellie no longer felt afraid. Beside Caleb, she no longer needed to hide, bow her head, or disappear into a silence that swallowed her whole. She was Ellie Bennett, the woman Caleb Hawthorne chose to walk beside through storms, beneath the gaze of the entire world. By early evening, the room was bathed in warm golden light from a floor lamp near the armchair. The noise of cameras and the relentless press had faded, replaced only by the soft thrum of wind tapping against the window and the faint scent of herbal tea drifting through the air. Ellie sat at the edge of the bed, her fingers intertwined tightly in her lap. Her dress had been changed, replaced by a thin sweater and comfortable pants, but her heart still carried the unease of standing before the world just hours earlier. Caleb stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, his posture straight, his gaze turned outward toward the sky darkening slowly into evening. He had not spoken since they entered the room, and that silence made Ellie's thoughts spin even faster. She watched him for a long moment before her voice finally surfaced, soft and hesitant, as if afraid to fracture the fragile stillness between them. "Do you regret it?" Caleb did not turn at once. Her question landed like a small needle piercing the delicate calm. A breath passed before he turned, and his eyes held no anger, no frustration, only a sincerity so deep it made Ellie feel as though she had confessed something she never meant to expose. He walked toward her, stopped in front of her, and lowered himself slightly, one hand on her shoulder, the other gently lifting her chin so she could not look away. "Regret what?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough to touch the deepest, most fragile place inside her. "Regret revealing everything to the media. Regret choosing me," Ellie whispered, her eyes dropping, as if even she realized how foolish the question sounded. "I know it was not easy for you. I am not the kind of woman people expect beside someone like you. I used to work in the kitchen. I am not beautiful, not famous, nothing remarkable. I am just me." Caleb's grip tightened slightly on her shoulder, and he sat beside her, turning so they both faced the same direction, as if revisiting the story they had written together. "I have never cared about the kind of woman people expect," he said slowly, with unshakable certainty. "I care about the kind of woman I cannot walk away from, the kind I cannot look away from, the kind I cannot help but protect." Ellie pressed her lips together, her heart beating unevenly. "But they will judge you. The press will dig into my past, my family. They will throw cruel words at us. Caleb turned to her, cupping her cheek with a tenderness that held steel underneath. I have lived my entire life under scrutiny, and I have never been more ready to face it than I am now. Because this time, I am not standing alone. He kissed her forehead, slow and unhurried, a promise placed upon the very spot where people hold their quietest fears. If I regret anything, Ellie, it is that I let you believe you were not worthy. No one has the right to make you think that, not even you. Ellie closed her eyes and leaned into him, letting his warmth seep into every anxious corner of her heart, washing away everything she once feared. In that small room, there were no cameras, no headlines, no roar of the outside world, only two people, and one truth that finally settled deep inside her, that she was not a temporary choice. She was the only one. Caleb rose quietly after Ellie had rested her head on his shoulder for a long, wordless moment, as if the entire world had paused just to let the two of them breathe in the same rhythm. He walked toward the wooden cabinet beside the fireplace, where a small, worn drawer remained locked at all times. Ellie followed each of his movements with her eyes, her heart tightening when she saw the unusual focus reflected in his gaze. Caleb opened the drawer and touched something inside with both hands, holding it as though he were cradling the most important part of himself, then slowly turned back to her. In his hands was a small velvet box, deep blue, simple and unassuming, yet carrying a quiet solidity that resembled the man holding it. He walked back to her, sat down, then lowered himself onto one knee, and Ellie nearly forgot to breathe. Caleb looked straight into her eyes, his gaze carrying every unspoken truth, every fear conquered, every battle they had endured to reach this one moment. He opened the box. Inside was a slender, vintage ring set with a modest stone that did not scream brilliance, but glowed with the same gentle elegance as the woman sitting before him. Ellie raised her hand to her mouth, unable to contain the soft gasp that escaped. She had never imagined witnessing this scene, let alone that the man kneeling before her would be Caleb Hawthorne, someone the world believed needed no one to complete his life. Caleb took her hand, not asking, "Will you marry me?" the way others did, but instead speaking in a low, certain tone that felt more like a vow. "I have had everything in life: money, power, enemies, and solitude. But from the moment I met you, I realized I never truly had the one thing that mattered most." He squeezed her fingers gently, almost as if reassuring himself. "Ellie, I do not want to love you in silence, in shadows, or in doubt. I want to love you in the light, before the entire world, so no one can ever question it again." Ellie felt hot tears spill over her lashes. She let out a soft, broken laugh, her hand trembling as he slid the ring onto her finger. "Caleb," she whispered, his name the only thing she could manage as every other word lodged painfully in her throat. But her eyes told him everything. Her answer was the silent nod, the quiet acceptance, the love no longer hidden. Caleb lifted her hand and kissed the ring gently, then looked up and murmured with the weight of someone making a vow before the universe itself. "From this moment on, you are no longer Ellie Grace Bennett." He smiled, his voice lowering though his eyes glowed with certainty. "You are Ellie Hawthorne, my fiancé, and later, my wife, for the rest of our lives." Ellie let out a breathless laugh through her tears, overwhelmed by how real everything felt. She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding tightly as though letting go might make the moment disappear. Caleb's arms swept around her, drawing her into a hold deep enough to shelter every wound of her past, every emotion of her present, and every promise of their future. In the stillness of the room, there was no ticking clock, no whispering wind, no lingering fear, only two hearts beating in the same steady rhythm, reaching toward a path they would walk together not in silence, but in light. And with the ring on her finger, Ellie knew that for the first time in her life, she no longer needed to ask whether she was worthy. The man holding her had answered that question with all the love the world once believed he did not possess. The early morning light spilled softly through the tall dressing room window, bathing everything in a pale golden glow, though it did little to calm Ellie's racing pulse as she stood before the mirror, her fingers gripping the edge of her gown. The cream-white dress hugged her figure with gentle elegance, a modest V neckline and a cinched waist that made her look both delicate and refined, yet that was exactly what made her more anxious. Not because the dress was not beautiful, but because she feared she was not enough to wear it, not enough to step into a world where hundreds of eyes waited to judge her. After Caleb's earth-shaking engagement announcement the night before, every major news outlet had sent reporters to attend the press briefing at the Hawthorne estate. No one wanted to miss the moment the most powerful man on the eastern coast presented his fiancée to the world. And Ellie, once an invisible kitchen worker, would step out of the shadows and face them all. She inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, but her hands still trembled when she touched a curled strand of hair falling over her shoulder. Whenever she closed her eyes, she heard echoes from her past, sharp whispers like blades slicing through her. She is not pretty enough, not polished enough, not slim enough, not enough of anything to stand beside Caleb Hawthorne. She knew he loved her. She believed it, but was love enough to silence the judgments that were coming, enough to keep her from feeling lost beneath the glare of designer gowns and the world's scrutiny. The door clicked softly, followed by a gentle knock, and a familiar voice made her turn. Caleb stepped inside without asking, his gaze taking in her fear before she had time to hide it. He wore a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and matching tie, tall, composed, unshakable. But when he looked at Ellie, something softened instantly. He crossed the room, placed his hand on her waist, and murmured beside her ear, "You are more beautiful than anyone I have ever met, and I am not saying that to soothe you. I am saying it because it is the truth." Ellie pressed her lips together, her eyes betraying the storm inside her. "I am afraid. I will disappoint you." Caleb frowned gently and turned her fully toward him so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "Listen to me, Ellie. I have stood before people who could crumble entire financial markets with a single phone call. Yet I have never seen anyone braver than you for loving me despite everything I carry. You do not have to be anyone else. You only have to be yourself. The Ellie I chose to be my wife." A tear slipped down her cheek, though this time it was not from fear, but from being understood, seen. Caleb brushed the tear away with his thumb, leaned in, and pressed a slow kiss to her forehead. "I will be right beside you, every step of the way." She nodded, slowly but with new resolve. The world might still whisper behind her back, their eyes might still question her worth, but Ellie knew that when she stepped through that door, Caleb's hand would be holding hers, and sometimes, one hand like that was enough to walk through an entire sea of people. The grand doors of the conference hall opened under the hands of 2 guards in black suits, and the light from dozens of cameras and spotlights swept inside like a breaking wave. Ellie stepped out with Caleb, hand in hand, walking between 2 aisles of people and lenses tracking every breath they took. The room fell silent for a brief heartbeat before the relentless clicking of cameras erupted, voices calling their names echoing in all directions. But Caleb did not pause, did not bow, and did not smile. He led Ellie to the podium prepared at the center of the hall, where the Hawthorne crest was carved in bold relief behind them. Ellie felt his hand still wrapped firmly around hers, an anchor in the storm, and when Caleb turned to face the press, the entire room fell back into silence as if commanded. His gaze swept slowly across the sea of reporters, sharp and measured, forcing even those who had interviewed him dozens of times to hold their breath. He did not read from notes, did not rely on scripted words. He simply spoke, his voice low and steady, each word falling with the weight of forged iron. "I know you all have hundreds of questions, and I will not answer all of them." A few people shifted, but none dared interrupt. Caleb continued, his tone softening only when he turned toward Ellie, who still held his hand beside him. "Some things do not need justification. They need only to be felt. And the only thing you must know today is—" He paused, his eyes darkening with a depth that silenced even the hum of cameras. Then he looked back at the press corps, dozens of lenses aimed directly at him. "She is the reason I am still human." A wave of stunned silence washed through the room. No one had expected that. Not from Caleb Hawthorne, the man known for ruthlessness, for unforgiving negotiations, for a gaze cold as winter steel, a man who faced enemies and the media with equal indifference. Yet here he stood, looking at a draped woman with an expression no diamond could ever reflect. "I once believed I needed no one. That control was everything. But then she stepped into my world without trying, without asking, without calculation. She simply existed, quietly, gently. And suddenly, everything I thought was absolute began to shift." Ellie remained still beside him, her heart pounding as each word struck the tenderest parts of her like warm light. Caleb turned to her again, and in that moment the entire room ceased to exist for him. "She made me want to be better, made me believe I was worthy of forgiveness, and if there is one thing you should take away from this conference, it is this." He tightened his grip on her hand, his voice deepening into something that sounded almost like a vow. "She is Ellie Grace Bennett, my fiancée, and the reason I still know what love, forgiveness, and humanity feel like." The cameras continued flashing, but this time they sought not scandal, but a moment none of them had anticipated. Caleb needed no further words. He bowed once to the audience, then led Ellie away from the podium. No one blocked their path. No one called out. They simply watched the two figures walking side by side, one once invisible, the other once untouchable, now intertwined, as though the existence of one proved the heart of the other still beat. In a world full of strategy and pretense, truth could cause the most powerful quake, and Caleb Hawthorne had delivered one not through power, but through love. The black Rolls-Royce glided smoothly past the iron gates of the Hawthorne estate, leaving behind the riot of flashlights and buzzing voices still clustered beyond the fence. Ellie sat beside Caleb, her gaze still carrying the emotional residue of the conference, her hands laced together in her lap as if trying to hold on to whatever calm remained after the storm. She finally turned to him, a question she had held for far too long rising to the surface now that they were alone. "Caleb, I want to know about Vanessa Pierce. Everyone keeps saying you were once engaged. Is that true?" He did not answer immediately. The car stopped at the marble steps of the estate, the driver opening the door for them, but Caleb gestured for him to wait. He turned to Ellie, the depth in his eyes stripped of their usual edge, replaced with rare honesty. "We were never engaged. That was what they wanted to believe, and I let them believe it." Ellie watched him quietly, waiting. Caleb exhaled, turning toward the window where rows of trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. "Vanessa is the daughter of one of Senator Dalton's major donors, a man who wanted to pull Hawthorne Group into his political circle. At that time, I stood between two forces. Choose one, lose the other, refuse both, become a target." He turned back to her, his voice lower, steadier. "I wanted nothing to do with politics, but I could not allow myself to become prey. Vanessa was the piece they placed in my hands. A collaboration disguised as an engagement." Ellie frowned, a strange ache curling through her chest. "So, you agreed?" Caleb shook his head, his eyes locked on hers. "I pretended to. We appeared together, took photos, fed the media enough to keep rivals from circling. But between her and me, there was nothing real. No touch, no promises, only silence. She needed the image, and at the time, I needed space to maneuver." Ellie looked down, fingers tightening in her lap, unsure whether she felt relief or the sting of something she could not name. Caleb reached out, gently lifting her chin so she met his eyes. "I was wrong to let you think you were a replacement, but you are not. You never were. Vanessa was political strategy. You are the choice my heart made." Ellie bit her lip, her eyes growing wet. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was afraid if I told you, you would see me the same way everyone else does. Cold, calculating. And I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of losing the way you looked at me as if I were still human." His words softened something deep inside her. She reached out and touched his hand, her gesture quiet but full of meaning. Caleb squeezed her fingers, pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, then stepped out of the car and guided her with him. On the white stone steps of the estate, their shadows stretching beneath the falling dusk, Ellie understood that no matter how many strategies lay behind him, the only truth he carried forward now was her. And this time, he was not hiding it. He was placing her at the center of the world he once kept locked away. Night fell over the Hawthorne estate as softly as a silk veil, draping the grounds in the gentle glow of a young moon and the quiet whisper of wind weaving through the branches. In the large West Wing room, once a forbidden place for Ellie, she now stood within what had become the safest sanctuary she had ever known. The fire in the hearth crackled low, its amber light tracing softness across. Her face as she stood by the window, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, her gaze following the shifting shadows of trees on the ground like fragments of memories that belonged only to her. After a day of upheaval in which she had been acknowledged not only by Caleb but by a world that once doubted her, Ellie still could not quiet the tremor beneath her ribs. She was no princess, no heroine. She had once believed she would spend her life in silence and obscurity. But everything had changed not because of magic, but because a man had dared to stand before the world and declare that she was something worth fighting for. Caleb entered without a word, and the room warmed instantly at the simple presence of him. He walked toward her, gently taking the cup from her hands and setting it aside. Ellie lifted her face to him, her eyes shining, not from sadness, but from a fullness so tender that even a light touch could have undone her. Caleb cupped her cheek, his fingers brushing her skin, with the careful reverence of someone who had once lost everything and had finally found the one thing he needed to hold on to. "You once told me you were afraid of becoming my weakness," he said, his voice raspy in the stillness. "But you have never been my weakness." He lowered his head, and his lips met hers without haste or heat, but with a depth and certainty that required no further words. When he drew back, he whispered against her ear, soft as drifting wind but weighted like a vow. "You are not my weakness. You are my reason. The reason I choose to remain human, despite everything cruel life once demanded I become." Ellie said nothing, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks, yet her face glowed with a radiance she had never known. She was no longer afraid, no longer doubtful, no longer a shadow standing behind grand doors. In that moment, they needed no promises, for they had already become inseparable pieces of one another. And from their love came the greatest truth. Sometimes the thing that saves a person is not power or wealth, but someone brave enough to love them when they are no longer sure they deserve it. Ellie did not need to change to be worthy of Caleb, and Caleb did not need to hide his true nature to keep her. They loved each other with every imperfect part of themselves, and that was the truest beauty of love. If this story has touched your heart, if you have ever felt lost in a noisy world or believed you were not enough to be chosen, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly want to hear from you, from the deepest places of your heart. How does this story make you feel? Does it remind you of someone who once held your hand and helped you believe you were worthy of love? Leave a comment so we know you are here, listening with us. Do not forget to like this story if it resonated with you. Share the video so its gentle light can reach someone who might need it, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the heartfelt, human stories we share each day. Thank you for walking with us through Ellie and Caleb's journey. We hope to see you again in the next video, with another story, another path that may make you cry or smile. Wishing you a peaceful day, a hopeful spirit, and a heart always warm. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.